Hey everyone, and welcome. We all fly, but have you ever stopped to think about what you're actually agreeing to with that single click to buy a ticket? In this explainer, we're going to dive deep into a concept called the contract of acquiescence and uncover your rights as a passenger under the super important Montreal Convention of 1999.
So let's start with a really basic question. When you buy that plane ticket, what are your actual rights? It seems simple, but this is our starting point for understanding the entire legal relationship between you and the airline.
Our plan for today is pretty clear. First, we'll look at when the Montreal Convention even applies. Second, we're going to analyze the nature of that air transport contract. Third, we'll get into the core duties of the airline. Fourth, we'll figure out exactly when the carrier is legally responsible. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the key takeaways.
Okay, let's dive in. Before we can even understand the contract itself, we need to know the laws that govern it. So let's start with the reach of the Montreal Convention to see when and where these rules actually apply.
The general rule, as laid out in Article 2.1, is that the Montreal Convention applies to all international air transport. This means its scope is incredibly broad, covering pretty much any international flight you might take. But of course, every rule has its exceptions. The convention doesn't apply to two main types of transport. First, you have transport carried out by a state for non-commercial sovereign purposes, or specific transport for military authorities. Second, the transport of mail and parcels is also excluded, mainly to avoid any conflict with international postal agreements.
Now we get to the core of our topic. What is the unique nature of that air transport contract we all sign when we buy a ticket? Is it really a one-sided deal?
Legally, an air transport contract is known as a contract of acquiescence. Simply put, this means that you, as the passenger, accept a set of pre-written terms and conditions prepared by the airline without any real chance to negotiate them.
So why is it classified this way? It really comes down to an imbalance of economic power. Airlines are the stronger party, while the passenger is considered the weaker party. Your choice is basically to accept all the conditions as they are or just not fly. There's no room for real negotiation.
But don't worry, that doesn't mean you're without protection. This is where the law steps in to protect the weaker party. Lawmakers place restrictions on the airline, and the courts can intervene to cancel any clauses that are found to be unfair.
And here's a really important point in your favor as a passenger. According to Article 151/2 of the Civil Code, if there's any ambiguity in the terms of the contract, the law is clear. It's always interpreted in your best interest, not the airline's.
So, since the law protects you as a passenger, it naturally places clear obligations on the stronger party, the air carrier. Let's take a look at what these core duties are.
We can sum up the carrier's main obligations in 4 points. First, they have to execute the contract as agreed, basically get you from point A to point B. Second, they have to provide an airworthy aircraft. Third, and most importantly, they have to guarantee your safety. And finally, they have to transport your personal baggage. Now, when we talk about airworthiness, it's actually split into 2 parts. You have physical airworthiness, which is about providing the services and comfort agreed upon in the contract. Then you have technical airworthiness, which is all about the safety of every part of the plane, from the engines and communication devices to the fire extinguishers.
All right, now we move to what is arguably the most critical part from a legal perspective. When can the air carrier be held legally responsible for any harm that comes to a passenger?
The legal basis here is Article 17.1 of the Montreal Convention. This article states clearly that the carrier is liable for damages in the event of a passenger's death or bodily injury.
But it's not quite that simple. For this liability to apply, 3 conditions must all be met. First, the damage must be the result of an accident. Second, that accident must happen during the specified transport period. And third, the accident must lead to death or physical injury.
So what exactly does the transport time period mean? This slide makes it crystal clear. The carrier's responsibility starts right here when you leave the terminal hall to board the plane. It continues while you're on board and during the process of getting off, and it only ends when you enter the arrival terminal at your destination.
Here's another key point to clarify. The convention specified the type of damage that is covered by compensation. Liability here is limited to death or bodily injury. Therefore, psychological damage, for example, is not directly covered by this article.
Okay, we've covered a lot. Let's wrap things up by summarizing the most important points that you should remember. So, what's the bottom line? Remember these 4 pillars.
First, the Montreal Convention has a very specific scope. Second, your contract is a contract of acquiescence, but you are legally protected. Third, the carrier has clear duties, and your safety is the most important one. And finally, the carrier's liability has very precise conditions. And now, I'll leave you with this question to think about. Knowing these rights and obligations, will you look at your plane ticket and your next trip the same way? Thanks for tuning in.